Nick Disney, welcome to the REI Diamond Show. How you doing today?
Doing great, man. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm in Chicago. I'll be heading to Florida in January. Just got back from the Bahamas. The cold weather is here now in Chicago. But just location stamping for the listener. Where are you abouts right now?
San Antonio, Texas. We don't do cold weather. We do. We just shut down the whole city. We're like, yeah, we're not built for it. But it's nice here right now. It's down to like 60 today, so we're pretty chilly.
Cool. So for the listeners who may not know who you are, you have a
Mhm.
pretty strong, I think, Instagram following, put out a lot of content there. So listeners may want to check that out. But would you mind kind of giving us a short synopsis of the development of your career and then what the business model looks like today?
Perfect. I'm a single family real estate investor in San Antonio, Texas. So that's 99% of our business. Started buying, wholesaling, some flips, started with building the rental portfolio. Now it's really transitioned into buying, rehabbing, and selling with owner finance. And so we want to sell the property, create a promissory note, which is our preferred method to produce long-term cash flow. And so now we create notes, we keep some of them, and we sell some of those notes to other folks who just want to buy the payment stream on the back end.
Yeah, so I have a friend. Actually, he was a guest on the show like 5 years ago, maybe before he even started doing this. Dan Zatofsky. He's out of Delaware. A
Okay.
lot of listeners local in Philly probably know the name. And he put this business model together. I never took his course, never went to his like networking event or his little seminars he did. And I think he's moved on to like developing resorts or something like that at this point. But the basis of his strategy seemed sound to me. I'm like, wow, that would be great. Sell it off and hold the note. And here's where I always got stumped, and I'm hoping you can just get this cleared off the table right from the beginning is the mortgage lending laws. So
Hmm.
selling it on, and I held paper on two deals, had to foreclose on both of them, got a pretty big payout in terms of the size of the loan from bailouts. So it was like
Hmm.
foreclosure bailout grants they got, and I'm like, hey, that was enough. I'm not even going to bother chasing them for the other $5,000 or whatever
Right.
they owe me. Like, if they call one day, I'll give them a payoff and release it. If not, it is what it is. But the thing that had me worried, or I would lose sleep at night, is I don't want to violate, federal mortgage laws
Mhm.
by creating too many notes. Maybe you have some insight on what those guidelines are, and maybe how you could get around that.
Sure. And they do change, and there's, like your national law and there's some state laws. But the the biggest key that I would tell anybody to getting started is we run everything through an RMLO, residential mortgage loan originator. We have one, and I'm sure there's one local to wherever you're at. They specialize in creating seller finance notes. Well, they're all licensed and they know all of the rules, and are very good at helping you follow all the rules. And so if you follow all the rules and you document everything appropriately and really just operate your business like you should operate it, it has not been an issue for us at all. Settler finance is probably more popular in Texas than almost any other state, but there's definitely people that do it all over. And so creating too many hasn't been a problem. Where people have run into problems is when they were doing different than directly selling it. So if we sell a house, Dan, you come buy it, we're going to give you, we're going to have a mortgage note deed of trust. We're going to give you the deed. You own it. We don't do lease option. We don't do rent to own. We don't do any of those types of creative strategies. Not to say that there's anything wrong with it. We directly sell them, and then we're just collecting principal and interest payment. And so I would not let that deter you from, or any of the listeners from doing it. If that's what they want to go, just make sure that you have the right people watching out for you.
So basically, you Google RLMO, residential
RMRMLO. Uh huh. Yep.
mortgage loan. Okay,
Hmm.
RMLO. And
Yep.
there's like what are they like servicing companies, Nick?
So those not really the servicing company. So a residential mortgage loan originator. So any bank that you went and got a loan from is going to have an RMLO in there. You just didn't know that's what it is, right? And so this company, if we take ours for example, right, we're going to sell this house to Jimmy. He's going to come buy it. We're going to put together his file and his paperwork. There's certain things that you have to document. We have to have a sales contract. We have to proof of income. We have to do if they have tax returns, bank statements, all these things that will go in there. They will run them. They will show their ability to repay. They will also create our disclosures. So anybody that's got a ever got a mortgage, you'll get your initial disclosures that you have to sign, and then you'll have final disclosures that you'll have to sign later. They will produce all those for us and make sure that everything is done appropriately, that we have correct debt to income for our borrowers, and that we don't go outside of any of the rules. And there's also certain timelines you have to follow. You can't just send the final disclosures 10 minutes before they close, that it's certain, and that will really protect you from, and most of them would be honest mistakes, but they would really help protect you and make sure you do things the right way. So that is where I would tell people to start. And if there's anybody in your local area that's doing a lot of owner finance, they probably have somebody that they could refer you to.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't know they existed and I didn't do all this stuff. So when I'm talking about, there was some loan or you could do one loan, but if you did more
Mhm.
than one loan, you got in trouble. Does that mean like if I did that and I did the paperwork on my own and didn't get all the disclosures and everything, I just did one, I'm okay. But if I started doing 5 or 10 of them, I'm not? Or, I mean, you're not a lawyer, right? So we're just kind of,
Right.
yeah.
So, right, we're not, but I could give you the general idea. And so it also depends on who you do that loan to. So I'm an investor. If you did a loan to me, you could probably write just about anything you wanted in there. But most of ours are to owner occupants. So there is a different set of rules there for the owner occupant. They're meant to protect families, protect predatory lending, and things like that. And I would, of course, check with your attorney, but it was three or more in a 12-month year. So if you did one or two, hey, it was no problem. You still would want to follow the rules. But once you did that third, you fell into a different set of rules, and it would impact things like we don't do balloon payments, but putting balloon payments, and then terms. And there's another set of rules you'd want to make sure that you followed. Um, and so my advice, it's not that hard to just do it right from the first one if you're going to do it. So start the right way with the first one. So that way, if you got to more than the limit, you'd still be okay.
Okay. So for the sake of a linear conversation,
Yep.
let's go through an example. Maybe it's a real one that you
Sure.
did in the last 6 months,
Yeah.
like purchase price, rehab. Let's go through all the numbers, all the details, and then we'll talk about the sale and like who's the buyer avatar on that actual deal. Was there an
Mhm.
application process, down payment, etc. So if we could start with the numbers of the deal, buy, rehab, renovate, and then
Mhm.
kind of go through the rest of the transaction just to give listeners an
For sure.
example. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a great idea. So we're in San Antonio, so that is a lower priced point you market just in general if you're looking at the U.S. But one that we are closing right now, we bought it for $90,000. It needed a little, needed some work, so we bought it for 90. We had to put in right about 25, but for sake of round numbers, let's call it 25,000. So you've got 115 in this property. Um, this is in an area where we have owner financed a lot. That's typically a blue collar neighborhood. We have a good quality product. They're safe neighborhoods. They may not be the fanciest neighborhoods, but we sold the property. We have it under contract right now. Sold for 165,000. The borrower is bringing 25,000 total. So that's not just $25,000 down payment. That 25,000 includes his down payment, closing cost, and we do have everybody prepay escrows, so taxes and insurance. And so that's a total $25,000 financial commitment from the person who wants to buy the house. We're going to finance it for 30 years. And so we had it rehabbed. We have a sales guy. He was showing the property. Most of them we don't sell on the MLS. We're typically going to have signs in the yard, Facebook Marketplace, and just some in our network. And reached out, wants to own a home. Got a good job. Guy makes good money. He saved $25,000, which is not the easiest thing in the world to do. But he is a contractor. He doesn't have traditional paycheck stubs. He doesn't have probably the greatest documentation of his financial history, but he's worked for a long time as a contractor. and he makes good money, and he can show that he makes his money consistently over a long period of time. So when you start to put all that together, we still have the same state sales contract. We still have the same owner finance addendum. We still have, we're still going to collect everything to document that he does make this much money, has the ability to repay it. Once we take that, we will send all that to the RMLO. All right. And they're going to say, okay, well, we need this. We need his IDs. We need any bank statements, any tax returns, any financial documentation we can use. They will send us back a report. Hey, Mr. So and so, we've got his report back. We show his debt to income looks good. I remember because I looked at it, I think yesterday, it's like 14%. Here's one of the key factors that we focus on owner finance. It doesn't mean this person has bad credit. Doesn't mean that at all. But it could very well mean that they have no credit. This gentleman paid cash for his truck. He has two of them. He paid cash for both of them. He has no credit cards. He's never had a credit card. He doesn't use, I guess, our U.S. financial system the way a lot of people do. There's not a lot of credit history. So his credit score is not good, but it's not because of negatives. It's because it doesn't really exist. But he has basically no other fixed debt than our mortgage. No other fixed set payments. So his DTI is really low. So someone like that has a lot of success in our model of consistently making their payment. They get to own a home and we get the cash flow. So we approved him, and the RMLO will send the initial disclosures. So for folks that don't know, the initial disclosure is basically breaking down. It's like his closing disclosure, but it's breaking down what his payment's going to look like over time, what his closing costs, his estimated closing costs are going to be. He signed those. We've got him set up with a closing date at the title company. We do have everybody close with title, even if they don't want to. I do recommend it. It's just a better process. Helps protect them and you. And so 3 days before, he'll get his final disclosures, which will have his final numbers of exactly what all his costs are. And we'll close them at the title company. And then one thing that we do is we do always use a third-party note servicer. So that's the person that will collect the payments. And he'll make his payments directly to them. They will then send us the principal and interest portion of it. And they will also, we do require everybody escrows. So they will hold the escrow accounts for taxes and insurance, make sure they're paid out at the end of the year, similar to a mortgage that, anyone else has had.
What kind of an interest rate does he have on this one?
We're typically at 10.9%.
Okay. And is there is that a legal limit based on something, or you're allowed to select the interest rate?
We are allowed to select it up to a certain point. The limit right now is somewhere around probably 18, 19%.
Wow.
We don't need to go that high. We wouldn't go that high. It really would. Even if you could charge it. I'm telling you, it'd be a bad idea because you're just going to set that person up for failure, and you're going to create more headaches, and that's not our business model. And at 10.9%, we do make good return, but it also allows them to make their payment. And really, we're trying to set up long-term payments where they just pay every month, 15 or 30 years, and we'll make plenty of money like that. We don't need to charge them a ridiculous interest rate.
So what is the payment
Um, his payment, I would have to pull it up, but
roughly?
it's principal and interest is going to be right around 14.20 a month.
And
Is prin-
are you typically like selling to this client, there's like a sign in the loan that says buy this home for 1,420 a month. Like, is this a payment driven kind of transaction for him, or is it price, or maybe most of them?
Yeah, so we can't put the actual payment on the sign. You can't say, hey, for this much, but typically our person that buys a house their financial concerns are how much is the down payment. We do charge more than typical in our business, but we have a lower default rate as well. So they want to know that, and then they want to know what their monthly payment is. That's typically where they're driven. After that, the actual sales price of the house is usually like a third question. That's their concern most of the time. And so if we can keep that principal and interest similar to what the rents are around there, it it makes a lot of sense to them. They will have taxes and insurance on top of that, but they can see that they're owning the home. And so down payment, monthly payment, and opportunity to own a home is probably the biggest driver.
Yeah, and I mean, are you not allowed to put the down payment and the monthly payment like in your Facebook ads? It's not allowed to go on the sign. What's
You
where
can't,
those
yeah, you can't put the monthly payment. You can't say what the monthly payment is, and that it would vary anyway. You can advertise the down payment that you're asking. That'll typically be in our ads. You know, 25,000 down is pretty much our standard. That varies. Obviously, we can run our business but it's not uncommon that we get 30 or $35,000 that people bring to the table.
So out of the 25, are we talking about 5 or 10,000 for prepaid escrow and the closing costs?
It'll so it'll vary depending on the time of year, but you're probably 7,500. 7,500 is going to go to closing costs and their prepaid escrows, um, because they're going to fund taxes, which Texas, our property taxes are a little higher than some other places. And so they're going to fund that, the interest, and then their closing cost.
All right, so you got 17.5 coming out of your 165 purchase price. You don't
Yep.
have to typically pay an agent because you're selling them direct or
We have a guy that works for us, so we do pay him, per house. Um, but yes, we're not selling like 3% for our agent, 3% for theirs.
okay.
Yeah.
So you're left with we'll just keep the commissions out of the math for the sake of the example.
Perfect.
147.5 is the note
Hmm.
and he's paying 1,420 a month. So you have this principal balance of 147.5 that's written to produce 10% interest. That alone's pretty good. But now let's talk about how you're financing that stack, right? Is Nick Disney just got 440 or well, you're in there for 115, so
Yeah.
you got some upside in the profit there. But are you leaving that 90 grand, 100,000, 110 sort of like your own cash is in the deal, or are you now selling that off? Like, what's the exit to maybe clean up your books and get to the final profit, if you will, on this deal?
Yeah. So it's a combination. We do sell a lot of them, right? This one we will sell because I already have someone that wants to buy it. And so if they buy it, we sell ours at unpaid principal balance. So if it's 147.5, that's the purchase price,
Nice.
147.5. Um,
And will it have to be like seasoned for 6 months before that person steps in, or your brand is kind of strong enough with this buyer? We're like, hey, give me the 10.9.
that's exactly what it is. It's the relationship. It's not the first note that he's bought. And so it's the relationship and just the product that you put out. So no, he'll buy it right after.
Okay, so 17, we're talking about a 10% down mortgage for this buyer.
Hmm.
I don't feel like it's totally unreasonable to pay 10.9% based on the risk profile. Borrower has no credit history. They can't go get, 6.5, 7% mortgage that's out there in the market now. And they're only putting 10% down. There's no PMI.
Hmm.
So it's a good deal. It's a
Good deal.
fair deal, right?
I really believe it is.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. So how many of these notes have you originated and sold? Do you know, Nick?
I don't. I mean, it's in the hundreds. I wouldn't. It's somewhere in there.
Okay.
Um,
Do you know if any of those have defaulted?
for sure, absolutely. There is no perfect system. We're really, really good, but we have an incredibly low default rate. We may have one or two a year. Um, but we've learned a lot over a long period of time. And when I say like we don't do bad credit, because if you do, you're going to have more defaults. Someone that brings had a saved $25,000 worked hard to save that most of the time. It's not easy for a person to do. They're really committed. But things happen. So we'll do that. And it's very rare that we have one default out of the gate. And if we do that, then we'll remedy that for the investor because that's also part of the relationship, you know.
What do you mean by remedy it? Is it like working it out with the buyer, some combination?
It's usually a combination. So we'll always work it out, right? So if Dan bought the note, hey, Nick, man, I didn't get paid. Well, that's not good, right? And so one, hey, we have to get your permission, but we'll reach out on your behalf, and we've already met them, so we'll talk to them, see if we can get it worked out. If we can't, and it's right out of the gate, I mean, typically we just say, hey, that's our fault. How about I give you another one, and we trade it out. So I could give you one and buy back the problem, and if I buy back the problem from you, then you don't have any problems, and then you go tell everybody that I'm a great guy and I fixed them all. So it really does work out for both of us, and it's
So is
easier
that
for us to fix it. Mhm.
is that like a written guarantee for your investor at all,
There's
or
no way
just
to
like
write it. There's no way for me to write it in there.
not legally, right?
No. I asked about it. Other people have asked me about it, which is why I asked the attorney about it. And so it's not, but it's also, I mean, you've been doing this a long time, right? If you help someone and you make sure that they don't lose any money, they will go tell everybody else that you made sure, and it's going to help your business in the long run. Um, and it's much easier for us to fix the issue with a note than most other people because that's our whole business model. And we're doing it every day. We just put it right back in the system.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. It's like if I'm sitting here in Chicago and I buy this note
Hmm.
in San Antonio and then it goes bad, I'm like, oh man, now I'm hunting around for the foreclosure attorney. I'm
Hmm.
figuring out how to get it back through the sheriff's sale or whatever it is that goes on there. It's fast in Texas. The laws are favorable for lenders in Texas, so it makes sense to have notes that are in Texas. It's probably part of the reason why an at par $147,500 note can transact is because there's a certain security that comes with being in Texas with the way the laws work there. Um, and then if it's torn up at all and needs another paint job, it's like I'm sitting here in Chicago having to figure out who can paint my
Right.
house, who can put the lockbox on there, who can come in and fix the broken pipe or whatever else is going on, right? That sounds like a big nightmare, but like at least some verbal, willingness to jump in there and kind of swap that out on your behalf would make me feel a little better about plunging in and earning my 10.9%. So if a note goes bad, what's your action item? Are you doing an attempt for cash for keys and then the backup plan is like taking it to the courthouse steps?
So rarely do we have to go to the courthouse steps. First thing that we do, whether it's my note or somebody else's, is we will contact them. So we make everyone come to the office. They have to sit down with us if they want to buy a house from us. One, we get to interview them in person, but two, they know us. So if we call, they know who's calling. They know there's a problem, even if we sold it. It does help. We will go talk to them. We'll knock on the door. Most of the time, if it's one payment, um, the conversation is, hey, I'm really sorry. Didn't have as much work. I'll make two payments next month. It's not a problem, right? You get the same amount of money. If they can't and they can't make it up and it has to go through, like I don't go down and do the foreclosure. I'll give anybody our foreclosure attorney. I'm going to send them an email. He's going to start the process. And then if it goes all the way and they don't catch up, which is very rare, he's going to send a second email saying, hey, what's the opening bid from the lender? Which, if you own the note, you would have your opening bid, what you feel like your costs are. And then the foreclosure, it's pretty simple and straightforward in Texas. Um, but again, we do everything we can to try to avoid that. It's just less headaches and it's a lot smoother.
Do you know how many have made it to that extreme end of the process?
When I first started, more they were my notes, because I made a lot, I made a fair amount of mistakes. And I don't know the number. I mean, it's less than that have gone all the way to foreclosure. It's less than 20.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not many.
Out of 100, 200, 300?
It's more than 300. It's in the,
Okay. All right.
I don't know, 400, 500. I mean,
Okay. All
very
right.
low, but you got to follow the process because if you don't, if you just Wild West it, and you're gonna give yourself headaches.
Yeah, I cringe at the thought of trying to duplicate this system. I've been in foreclosure in Chicago and in the Philadelphia region. We have a judicial system, which means there's like a year to 2 year or 3 year court process. before you get a judgment, and then the judgment then goes to the sheriff's sale to be scheduled, and that could be anywhere from like 1 to 6 months to get to the to steps. So you're talking, it's like 3 years. You're like, wow, that property. I'm over here having to pay property taxes to protect my mortgage for two
Hmm.
years.
That
um,
we don't have
so
that.
yeah, I cringe at picking the wrong state and not having somebody who's like a third party kind of handling that stuff.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that's good that you have the volume there. So 20 out of like 500, it's probably 2 or 3% default rate in the whole country. That's probably about average with, Fannie, Freddie, and conventional mortgages. We're probably in the 2 to 4% range anytime. If the market's like in a state of crashing, we're probably 3 to 6% or higher, like when we came through 2008, 9, and 10.
Hmm.
Recently, if I had to guess, and I haven't checked in like 6 to 9 months, but I think we're at like 2 to 3% default rate. Now, that default rate wasn't that they made it all the way through the process. That was foreclosure filings that I was tracking. So those were the
Right.
default rates on that. Okay. So your model is to cycle the cash back out. You've made 17.5. It's just like flipping a house without the cost of the real estate agent. So you've like
Mhm.
kind of chiseled down that expense to whatever it is you're paying your internal sales guy. And then you're all in for 115. So your net profit's kind of like a clean 40 to 50,000 on a deal like this.
Yes.
And
Pretty.
do you think if you took it to the open market, it would have been more like, oh, we'll give you 155 with a $5,000 assist and plus are you kind of
Um,
able to like get like a market value without quite as hard of a negotiation maybe if you were to go to market?
um, No, I mean we sell ours at market value. We'll run we sell them at value, and so we don't get a lot of pushback on the price. So we're getting that. We do have a couple extra steps, but we do control more of the steps, and it's more predictable in our model. And we have less people, as far as the buyer's agent, other issues coming through. So it does allow us to be very smooth. We're pretty dialed in our buy, rehab, sell, and then either sell the note or, I mean, there's other options. Like sometimes you can refinance a note just like you can a house as well.
In,
So, that's something that more people should do.
okay, let's go on that thread then. So we ran through the example of selling the note and getting your cash back out.
Yep.
So how does the refinance work?
So, it's going to work very similar to the way you'd refinance a rental property. I relate it to that because many people have done that. But you're not refinancing the property because you don't own it. What you own or what you have is this note and deed of trust. You have this income stream or a note receivable. Well, you can take that and pledge that as your collateral to the bank. Now, you are not just going to walk into any old bank and do this. Okay. It's just not going to happen. One, you probably need to have an established relationship with them. They don't tend to open this up to anyone. And they're typically going to be one of your local banks who understands real estate and you've built a relationship with them. But once you have done that, if you have this note, you can go in and refinance it very similar to the way you would refinance your rental property, and you'll pull back a bunch of that capital. So let's say Dan had a really good deal, went through our entire process. He's 115 in, but he has a note and he can refinance and get most of his 115 back out, right? Then he doesn't have near as much money left in this deal, but he still is collecting the payment. He just has a payment to make to his bank for, you know, his cash out refi on the note.
Is there a small spread there? Like, what do you think that, a note you actually know was refinanced in the last 6 months? What was
Mhm.
the interest they were paying to the bank?
7.5%.
So you're making the 7.5 to the 10.9, so like a 3% spread on the interest. That's the goal. Is that the standard sort of, or
It would be hard to say that's a standard because it really, really varies. I don't even know if there is a standard where what worked for us, especially when money was a little cheaper and interest rates would go down, is if we had a 30-year at 10.9, and so this payment is X, and we would go back and get a 10 or a 15 from the bank at a little bit lower interest rate. And if you could wash those out, really you would just give up those first few payments, but you have all of your money back. You get all your money back and you still have, even if the cash flow is not very much, once you pay off, because the one you get is going to be shorter. It's not going to be a 30-year note. It's going to be a shorter note. You basically have, if it's a 10, 20 years of gravy or a 15 years of gravy left over. And so that allowed for growth because we were really using the same capital more than once, right?
Hmm. At that point in time, Nick, was it more advantageous for you to not ever sell off any notes? Like it almost feels like it would be, right? Like why bother the headache of having to guarantee verbally these notes and deal with investor calls when the payments stop? Like why bother with all that headache? Why not just refinance every one of them out?
Because they do two different things. When you refinance them out, right, you're hanging on to them, and it is simpler and saves some steps, and you'll get those back end payments, which is great. But when you sell them, you're getting cash in your business, and any business that needs to recoup capital and put cash in because you're still going to have other expenses. And so when you sell them, you're putting cash back in, and when you're hanging on to them, you're creating long term cash flow. And so
You're
it
you're
really
leaving
depends.
some of that cash every time you refi in the deal in a sense.
Typically, you are. Yeah.
How much? Is it 10 grand, 20 grand on each one? What is it? 115 note. What are they going to give you on the refi?
Um, on a 7.5. We'll use that one. We use as an example. Um, so 103, 250. So there you're leaving 12,000 in it.
Okay.
Um, some are less, when depending on how when you have a really good deal, those are the great ones to refi because then you can get all your money out. So say we had bought that, 10 or $12,000 less. Then you get all of your money back out and you really don't have anything left in. Those are great to refi. But your business needs capital. You have people to pay, and it's it's a balance of the long term and the short term win, and the business needs both. So that's why we would use both.
And is that 103, 250, that's not based on the principal balance of the note. It must be based on what, either a desktop or a drive-by or an actual appraisal of the property and then an LTV from there. Is that kind of the metric the bank is using?
Exactly. So it typically won't be a full appraisal. It'll typically be a drive by, and it'll be, say, I mean, it's depends on the bank, but typically we were at 70%. So it'll be 70% of the appraisal value or the unpaid principal balance, whichever is lower. So they're going to take the lower number and they're going to give you 70% of that.
70% of the unpaid balance?
Right. So if they would do an appraisal on the property. Well, it's
Okay.
going to come in at 165, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you could refi up to 70% of the 70% of the 165 up to the unpaid principal balance. They're not going to give you more than what the
Okay.
promissory note is, right? Um,
But then the other one was 70% and it was the lower number. So what was the lower number you said?
the lower number that I said.
I don't know. I may have missed. My mind is blown right now because I'm like,
Yeah.
holy shit, I can't believe you refi notes. Like,
Uh,
how many of these could I get? Like, I'm gonna fly down to Texas and like see this banker so I could set up like a few million bucks worth of these
I
things.
I I know some people that have them, and there are banks that will do millions. Um, so it's in the cards for you. Um, yeah.
So
Uh,
yeah, you said 70% of the appraised value. So if that 165 example, I'll do
mhm.
the math, times point 0.7, that's 115 they'll give you on that loan.
Right, and they would give you that, but they won't give you more than what the unpaid principal balance is, right? So whichever one's less. So on this
So
one, the unpaid
on
principal
that one,
balance.
he owes us 147. So like if I bought the note for
Uh-huh.
147, I'm getting 115.5 back,
Yep.
147.5. And I would have 32 grand in the deal in that instance.
In that instance, you would. Uh huh.
Yeah, so in those instances, I get it. That makes sense why you would sell because how many of
Hmm.
these $32,000 long-term 30-year investments do you want to have sitting there as a business owner? Like I totally get it in that instance, right?
Hmm.
Are there times where someone instead, I imagine San Antonio houses had a little appreciation over the last couple
Yeah.
years.
Mhm, mhm.
So you bought 2 years ago. There's a little bit of mortgage pay down, but the house traded at 135 2 years ago, and now it's at 155, 160. So it made sense to season your note for a year or two before you do the refi. Is that like maybe a strategy too?
We don't. It's a pretty good strategy. I've never thought about it. We never used it like that. It makes a lot of sense. Um, you can do that. It's always easier for if you don't have the reputation or relationships to season your note for a few years because if you want to sell it or refi it, I guess, because you're going to get a higher appraisal. But if you go to sell it and somebody you can show good pay history, hey, this guy's never missed a payment in 2 years. That shows a lot of confidence, and so you'll probably get a higher value for selling a longer seasoned note. Um, so there's always reasons to hang on to them. If you're a business owner and you're continually turning, then to your point, sometimes you're not going to want to leave that money in there. Um, a lot of people that buy them are not, the majority of people that buy notes are not full time real estate investors who are actively investing. They understand real estate, they like it, they want the cash flow, and they don't want the headache of, say, rentals or running a business. And so for them, they're like, no, I want to put this here and I want to get paid every month. They're not looking to be active into, they're not running the business that you're running. So I guess they have different goals.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, there's two ways that anyone listening could kind of go about it. And there's people doing this kind of a business model. Like I know someone in Minneapolis doing this exact business model. And I'm looking from the outside. I know he has a few bucks in the bank, so he might be keeping the money in there. He's probably got this refi thing set up, and I'm like, there's no way I'm gonna hold paper on a flip a house and then hold paper and then wait for the money. I thought that's kind of what he was doing. Like, no way. But if you can refinance back out and sort of set them up for the long term, it starts to make a lot more sense how something like that would scale. But the listener could kind of like do this type of deal and this strategy on their own and flip the house and kind of set up the note and work a business model that way. Or maybe there's a listener who has 5 or 10 rental properties or maybe even more and is kind of feeling the way that I am, where I'm, and probably the other clients, where it's like, the tenants and the toilets and the eviction going on. It's like I've lost quite a lot of sleep from rental properties over the past 7 years since I started buying them and owning them. Then I'm kind of whittling them down as we speak for that reason. But yeah, a note that's actually paying setup property with the RMLO in place and the servicer in place. I didn't have either of those on any of the notes that I've done. I can see the attraction for a more passive real estate investment. And at 10.9%, right? It's like, if it's 6.5, it doesn't seem worth the effort.
Right.
At 10.9, you're starting to get into the okay, maybe it's worth the effort to figure this out.
Yeah, and at 10.9, if it's passive and it's written down, and it's people that transition from rentals to buying notes are typically doing A, because it's passive, they don't have to do anything. They like real estate in general, and they get to keep it as the collateral, and then it's very predictable. We don't have the swings of, say, like the up and down that you see in a stock market. It's just 10.9. That's what it is. It's not. It's very predictable. So for people that want that, it's a great fit. You know, if you're looking for something else, then there's probably something else that's a better fit.
Are there any avatars that you have where they were in the rental business and you guys connected a few years ago and now they're kind of transitioned and they're doing mortgage notes? Maybe you could, without naming names,
Sure.
tell the story a little bit.
Um, I have several, but one that comes to mind, he'd owned several rental properties. I think he still has one. He was also a short-term private lender for us for a long time. It's a great guy. Um, and he saw what we were doing, and then but he was just committed to for the longest time Manium, and then he sold a rental, and he's like, well, I want one of these notes. Yeah, okay. So we built you one, and then he kept them, and then he'd sell one like every other year. And we've probably worked with him for 10 or 12 years now, and I think he's got one left, and he's like, I don't ever want to own anything else. Just give me these notes, just let me get paid, and I'm going to travel. That's his vision. That's what he wants to do, and it's a win-win. But a lot of people will also a combination, like using the rentals for the equity, and they're really easy to leverage, in comparison. And then owning the notes, if you have liquid, especially if you're farther on, for the pure cash flow, because they're going to give you more cash flow and it's more predictable. And so sometimes having that balance, we see that a lot, and a lot of people have a lot of success. That's our business model. We have a balance of having both and using each one for what they do well, and not trying to make like a rental be your primary cash flow driver when something else might be better.
Yeah. And what do you think? If someone's got 20 rental properties. If you had 20 rental properties right now and you weren't sitting in your seat, but you were in my seat, let's say, having the conversation with you, what would be the balance? I mean, is it done in like dollar amount? Not really number of properties, right? 50-50, 60-40, and you love them, so like maybe yours is like, dude, I'd be like 100%, and get rid of all 20. I don't know.
I think as I'm transitioning, I'm probably getting more. I don't know that I'd get rid of them all at once, but the conversation that I often have with people is, what's your goal or what's your number? And if there's a cash flow number that would, let's say our average note pays $1,500 a month. If your cash flow number is 6,000 a month, and then that pays all your bills, we'll use easy math here, right? Then getting to the first four notes is huge, because you can see then the advantage of having $1,500 a month times four. You've got your 6,000 on 30-year notes, depending on where you're at. If that was covered for the next 30 years, that was all your bills, you just get a lot of freedom. And for each person, that number is going to be different. But that is a way that I would encourage someone to look at it, because they might be like, man, I want to hang on to these rentals, but I also want to have the protection of this cash flow. Maybe I sell three, six, eight, and keep the others. And what could I turn that into for long term cash flow? That is really how I would look at it. And for me, you're correct. I sell them off as I go along and turn them into notes, and then, I don't know, do whatever I
Yeah,
feel like doing.
and I guess the only thing that probably is unsettling to the person with the 20 rentals is the 20 rentals are hopefully staying at least at their current value and producing the return. They come with the chiseling away of the turnover expenses and the repairs, so that has to be accounted for. The growing taxes on the properties are going to chisel away at the cash flow. So you have a lot of things eating at sort of your principal balance in a rental portfolio as time goes on. Ideally, your equity spread grows, so you kind of have a larger pile with rental properties, but you do have the monthly payment chiseling away at your principal balance in
Right.
the.
Mhm.
So yeah, that might be the only other kind of negative side of the coin, would be seeing the principal balances go down. Hopefully, you have another method of running your business or running your life where you're able to continue to kind of replenish the note supply, as it were.
You're right, but they're amortized like any other loan. So it's also not like you get that first $1,500 payment and the balance went down by $1,500. You get a $1,500 payment, the balance went down by like $7 or something, because all that interest is paid up front. So I would definitely, to your point, encourage people to maybe save some of that so they can buy another one, and then you can really kind of have it replenish itself and make it last an incredibly, incredibly long time.
Yeah, I love it. What are the things I maybe forget to ask that are probably pertinent for the listener right now?
Um, I think for all the listeners, step back, know really what your goal is and whatever product you're going to buy. If it's rentals, flips, owner finance, self storage, commercial, does it truly accomplish what you're trying to do? Because I have made those mistakes. You buy certain things and they're really not going to give you reach your goals. Um, And I think if they know that, then they should definitely, at a minimum, learn about notes. It's much easier to own them than typically people think. If you have capital, you could buy one tomorrow. And so know what that is. How would that balance your portfolio? And if it would add to it, I would encourage you looking at it. From my experience, the notes are typically more cash flow that's more predictable. And so balance that with what your goals are. And everybody's got to set up the best thing for them.
Cool, love it. Nick, are there one or two book recommendations you would have that have been impactful in your 15-year real estate career?
Mm, the one that I throw out there, it's not even Eat That Frog has helped me a lot. And I'd like to use it. I mean, obviously, Rich Dad Poor Dad was where I got my start, like any of us. But Eat That Frog, it really just, the idea is just do the hardest thing first and get it out of the way. Makes everything else easier to do. It's very short, it's very easy to read. And I still say it to myself, you know. So I like that one for anybody else. And and that's the one that stands out.
Cool. Crown Jewel of Wisdom. So you've been at it 15 years, which is kind of a setup because you've already talked about transitioning. But if you were going to go back and tell yourself what the Crown Jewel of Wisdom is, knowing everything you know now, back 15 years ago when you were first starting into
Mhm.
business, what would that be?
uh, Build the best relationships you can now and take care of them, and the money will take care of itself. Um, because now that I've done this long enough, I've had relationships for years and years and years, and they may not have made a lot of money up front, or maybe you didn't maximize every single dollar out of the gate. But building the relationships with the right people, both of you will make so much more over the long term, and that's really what I would go back and day one focus on. And I think be great for anybody getting started.
Cool. Is there somewhere, before I ask my final question, is there somewhere listeners can go to get more Nick Disney?
Um, so you can definitely find me on Instagram, real estate underscore Nick, and then the number one. We put a lot of content on there, and feel free to reach out to me there or send me an email. I love to connect with people. If we can work together, if I can help you, if you can help me, whatever it is, Nick, Nick, and it's our website, sellmysanantoniohouse.com, Nick at sellmysanantoniohouse.com. And yeah, I like to talk to people. I love real estate. So if we can connect and do something, I'm happy to do it.
Nice. Nick, my final question. What is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for you?
The kindest thing anyone has ever done for me. Uh, Real estate related or just in general?
Hey, you answered how you want.
Uh, Man, I'm gonna keep it real estate related, so you don't pull up my heartstrings here. But when I started, there was a guy who like I had no money and no one would lend me any money, and he lent me money on these deals, which he probably shouldn't have. I probably wouldn't have. Um, and but it allowed me to really get started on several of these initial deals, and as you know, getting through those first few is such a game changer. It just mentally knowing that you can do it. It doesn't matter really how much money you make. But without him taking a chance on me because he believed that I could do it for whatever reason, I'm super thankful. It was super kind, and it was definitely something they didn't have to do. And it made a huge impact for me.
Yeah, I could answer with a very similar situation early on myself. I get that. I remember he gave me like a $10,000 construction draw, my first
Hmm.
lender.
Hmm.
My credit was terrible. Like, the scenario I wouldn't have lent myself. Like, and he just gave me the 10 grand. I'm like, wow, 10 grand, this is amazing. And he's still a business partner to this day. So I guess he made the right choice and I paid him back his money with interest.
There you go. There you go.
Cool. Nick, I had a blast. I got pages of notes. My mind is blown. I can't believe that you can refi these notes. I mean, this just opens up a whole sky blue ocean out here of a new asset class in my mind. So I appreciate you reaching out and getting us connected
Yes,
here
sir.
so that we could have the show.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it. Yeah, let's stay in touch.